Good morning, everyone. Pastor Howie here on this Monday of the last Monday of Advent as we approach Christmas Eve and Christmas this week. Today is Monday, December 21st, 2020. At 5:02 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we passed through that moment in the Earth's orbit around the sun called the solstice. And so now, and each day ahead for the next 6 months, there'll be a little bit more daylight and a little less darkness. And that really fits in nicely with Christmas, which I think is why Christmas comes at this time, because this historical and ancient observation, especially by Celtic people and other pagan people, pre-Christian people, fit so nicely with the idea of celebrating the light of the world coming into the world through the womb of Mary, which we celebrate as Christmas. Anyway, I got some lectionary thoughts for you, and it looks to me like they're all going to be oriented towards Advent and Christmas. So here we go. I'm going to adjust this just a little bit. We begin with Luke chapter 1, verses 46 through 55, which will serve as our psalm today. And it's Mary's song. Some people call it the Magnificat, but it's just her song. And so we find in verse 46, Mary responding to events around her, and Mary said, "My soul glorifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior, for he has been mindful of the humble state of his servant. From now on, all generations will call me blessed. For the Mighty One has done great things for me. Holy is his name. His mercy extends to those who fear him from generation to generation. He has performed mighty deeds with his arm. He has scattered those who are proud in their inmost thoughts. He has brought down rulers from their thrones, but lifted up the humble. He has filled the hungry with good things and has sent the rich away empty. He has helped his servant Israel, remembering to be merciful to Abraham and his descendants forever, just as he promised our ancestors." Now, the reason I call this a psalm is it is a psalm. It's not contained in the book of Psalms. Quite a bit of the stuff that's in here is a reflection of Mary's knowledge of the scriptures. So she may have been a teenager, but she may have come from a humble place called Nazareth, but she obviously had knowledge of the scriptures, and she certainly had special knowledge from the message that Gabriel gave to her that she was going to bear the Son of God. And so here we have this remarkable case of fulfillment of prophecy that a virgin never had any sexual relations with any human being. This humble virgin has been chosen by God to host the incarnation of God himself in basically the beginnings of life at conception. It's amazing that the infinite God can fit himself into what biologists call a zygote. That is that first group of cells that form a human being in the womb of a woman. This human being that was being formed is the most special human being of all. And these words that Mary recites back to God and recites to anyone who will hear are our words as well. For through God has done great things for all of us through the incarnation of his Son, Jesus Christ. Now, kind of related to that is something a little bit more within the realm of what we understand when it comes to the conception of children, but at the same time, it's something remarkable too. It's one of those cases like the case of the birth of Samson. His mom had been barren most of her life, and then all of a sudden an angel visits her and says she's going to have a son, and he's going to rise up to be a great hero of Israel, one of the judges of Israel, Samson. And the fact of the matter is that it's not an incarnation. It was an actual birth done the way that births are always done in our lives. But it was remarkable in the sense that Manoah and his wife had no expectations of ever having a child until this visitation from an angel. And so here we have another case where there was a certain man from Ramathaim, a Zuphite from the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah. So here in the book of 1 Samuel chapter 1, verses 1 through 8, or 1 through 18, we have the account of another woman who had been barren all of her life and had to share her husband because he had another wife who picked on her all of her life because she had children, but this woman couldn't have children. This woman prayed and prayed and prayed that the Lord would give her a child. And here's the account of how this took place. So this man named Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite, he had two wives. One was called Hannah, and the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had none. Year after year, this man went up from his town to worship and sacrifice to the Lord Almighty at Shiloh, where Hophni and Phinehas, the two sons of Eli, were priests of the Lord. Whenever the day came for Elkanah to sacrifice, he would give portions of the meat to his wife Peninnah and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her, and the Lord had closed her womb. Because the Lord had closed Hannah's womb, her rival kept provoking her in order to irritate her. This went on year after year. Whenever Hannah went up to the house of the Lord, her rival provoked her, till she wept and would not eat. Her husband, Elkanah, would say to her, "Hannah, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons?" Remember, Elkanah was a man, and some of us who are male, actually most of us who are male, are usually pretty clueless about this kind of stuff. So he didn't understand. Once, when they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, Hannah stood up. Now Eli the priest was sitting on his chair by the doorpost of the Lord's house. In her deep anguish, Hannah prayed to the Lord, weeping bitterly. And she made a vow, saying, "Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head." As she kept on praying to the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying in her heart, and her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. Eli thought she was drunk. And he said to her, "How long are you going to stay drunk? Put away your wine." Again, here is someone who is basically jumping to a conclusion that is not the correct conclusion. "Not so, my lord," Hannah replied. "I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I have been praying here out of my great anguish and grief." Eli answered, "Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him." And as I read that this morning, I took heart that that is something that we can take to ourselves as well, no matter what our circumstances are, and no matter what our prayers are. They may be prayers that go on and on and on, but we can bless one another with these words. May the Lord, the God of Israel, grant you what you have asked of him." And she said in verse 18, "May your servant find favor in your eyes." And she went away, ate something, and her face was no longer downcast. And the story continues perhaps tomorrow. But here is a situation where there was religious tradition, and the religious tradition forbade women to speak in the tabernacle. And Eli noticed this, jumped to the conclusion she was drunk, she was not following the traditions. And as we come to the book of Hebrews, in Hebrews chapter 9, verses 1 through 14, we learn some things about religious traditions that are very important for us to understand. Now, the first covenant had regulations for worship and also an earthly sanctuary. A tabernacle was set up. In its first room were the lampstand and the table with its consecrated bread. This was called the holy place. Behind the second curtain was a room called the most holy place, which had the golden altar of incense and the gold-covered ark of the covenant. The ark contained the gold jar of manna, Aaron's staff that had budded, and the stone tablets of the covenant. Above the ark were the cherubim of the glory, overshadowing the atonement cover. But we cannot discuss these things in detail now, because by the time this book of Hebrews was written, the ark had been long gone. When everything had been arranged like this, the priests entered regularly into the outer room to carry on their ministry. But only the high priest entered the inner room, and that only once a year, and never without blood, which he offered for himself and for the sins of the people, or for the sins the people had committed in ignorance. The Holy Spirit was showing by this that the way into the most holy place had not yet been disclosed as long as the first tabernacle was still functioning. This is an illustration for the present time, not only for the people who read this in the first century, but for us as well, indicating that the gifts and sacrifices being offered were not able to clear the conscience of the worshiper. Ritual and religion can only go so far. They are only a matter of food and drink and various ceremonial washings, external regulations applying until the time of the new order. Well, the new order has come. And verse 11 tells us how the new order came. But when Christ came as high priest of the good things that are now already here, he went through the greater and more perfect tabernacle, that is not made with human hands. That is to say, is not a part of this creation. He did not enter by means of the blood of goats and calves, but he entered the most holy place once for all by his own blood, thus obtaining eternal redemption. The blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer sprinkled on those who are ceremonially unclean sanctify them so that they are outwardly clean. How much more then will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself unblemished to God, cleanse our consciences from acts that lead to death, so that we may serve the living God. We are able to serve the living God in eternity to come and in this life today because of what Christ, who was born of the Virgin Mary, that we celebrate throughout Advent and especially on Christmas Day this coming Friday, because of what Christ came into this world to do, came into the world to save sinners like me, like you, like every other human being on the face of this planet. We're all in the same boat. We're all in this together, and I don't mean the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean the fallen world in which we live. But Jesus came to lift us out of our humiliation as sinners into the glorious presence of God in his own blood and the breaking of his own body, so that our consciences may be clear, our hearts may be cleansed, and we may serve him forever. So indeed, let us celebrate the coming of Christ this Christmas. God bless your day. I'll see you tomorrow.